Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Two Friends Podcast. My name is Brian, and I'm here as always with Fowler. Say hello.
I am here and I am ready.
All right, let's do this thing. And so today we're here to talk about the film 12 Angry Men. It's a film by Sidney Lumet, who directed it as his directorial debut in 1957. So, as always, we're going to start here with a summary, real quick.
Oh, we should just say quickly, he also made Network, which we reviewed. So this is the
Yes.
same director.
Yeah, same director. But as always, we're going to start here, like I said, with summary. So here goes. 12 Angry Men starts with the end of a trial before deliberation about a murder where the plaintiff is facing the death penalty. The decision to put the plaintiff to death or not is not a majority decision, but rather has to be a unanimous decision with all the jurors. Must agree. Initially, the case seems open and shut, but Juror 8 is the first one and only one who votes not guilty in preliminary voting due to being principled, which sparks a discussion with all the other jurors, with each juror slowly coming to the verdict of not guilty. Juror 8 then slowly convinces the other jurors, with Juror 3, 4, and 10 being the most antagonistic. Eventually, the only one left still thinking that they are guilty is Juror 3 due to a prejudice, until he too eventually comes to a non-guilty verdict in a dramatic fashion at the end of the film. So it's a very simple, straightforward plot, but the big thing we want to focus on with this one today is the characters, because as you know, the title implies there's 12 of them. So if we want, we can go over each one individually, starting with Juror 1. Do you want to take it away there, Fowler?
Yeah, you want to do them before strengths?
Um, Actually, let's go into strengths first. I'm sorry. Um, so first we'll talk about the first and most important thing is the plot and pacing are a really big strength of this film. So
Yeah, I would say when we reviewed Eternal Sunshine, which we both gave a 10 out of 10. One of the things they said that really blew my mind about Eternal Sunshine was that it perfectly balances the heart and mind of that film, where it's a very cerebral, intelligent, meticulous film, but it's also a film that really understands emotions and suspense. And I think 12 Angry Men is like that as well. It's a perfect mix of kind of heady um, and like emotional. You have the actual writing about the case itself, which is really smartly written. I think it's one of the smartest written films we've ever reviewed. Like, there's just all this detail in the dialogue and the objections about the evidence, both for and against the boy having murdered his father. They're realistic, but they're also very surprising, and it really keeps things going. And then also like the emotional twists of like different characters having their times to shine and revealing about their character, their monologues. I think like it's the smartness, but also the emotionality of this film really being weaved expertly together that gives it such excellent pacing and suspense. I really feel like there isn't really a slow point in the movie. It really keeps building and building, and it goes by really fast. I mean, it's not a very long film, but it's smooth the entire way across. I think,
and I think
my
that's
opinion.
an important thing too. Like obviously like writing talent wise, it's up there. I think personally Eternal Sunshine is like probably my favorite film of all time, so it's cemented up there even above this 10 out of 10 film. But for me it's the writing is witty. It can be funny at times, um, but it can also be very like pressing and poignant. Point. Yeah. Uh, it's one of those things where I think it is really just showcasing um, just this sort of written naturalism that I don't think a lot of films capture well. I think a lot of films focus on these dramatic dialogues, and you do get some of that with, like, especially the big monologues at the end with Juror 3 and things like that. And there are some big monologues, like Juror 11 has a monologue about democracy, for example. But but these are dialogues. These aren't sort of akin to like stage performances, right?
Yeah,
Um,
Lumet has a history of using that kind of naturalism in his writing,
mm,
and you can really feel it, like the shifts in emotion and conversations, the meandering way the characters talk, the way they interrupt each other when there's a bunch of them in a group, the shifting of focus in the conversation, and like the lingo, like it
mm,
feels very real and earthy. And I think you can see this also in the physicality of the characters. Like they don't really walk and move and kind of sit like stage performers. They sprawl, they pace, they swear, they sweat, they smoke. Like it's just very um it's very visceral, really, in the
even
way that the characters are and the environment is.
Yeah, even with saying that too, I was gonna say that like you can still tell that this is an adaptation of the stage, right? Like there's
Yeah.
this grandiose sort of things. It's a very simplified set piece. Like there's not like this spectacle that like you would encounter with most film. But also you have to keep in mind that this was a film that was created in 1957. You know, sort
Mm.
of in the infancy of uh, or the golden age of that media. So
Mm.
um, another thing you mentioned, and I'm curious to hear why you think this is such a heavy strength, because it interests me when you um, put it on there, is weather. Why is weather something that you find to be the strong point in this film?
Well, in case we haven't mentioned this overtly yet, it's a bottle film where
Mm,
it's all in basically the jury room. But and it's very minimalistic in terms of the pieces, I guess, the set pieces. Like it's really the chairs, the table, the windows, the broken fan, and I think they go in the bathroom once. Um, but like, so that they don't have a lot to work with in terms of visual symbolism. So the one visual symbolism that I really liked was the weather. The film starts like on the hottest day of the year, is what they say. And you
mm,
can tell, like, the characters are covered in sweat. They keep fanning themselves or like wiping themselves down their handkerchiefs. The fan isn't working. They can't get the windows fully up. And I think that really works as a metaphor for the beginning of the film, where like it's this stifling, single oppressive view of his guilt. And there's all this underlying tension and prejudice and sort of, like emotionality underlying that seeming calm, and also the idea of like heat rising, like the sort of guilty verdict is coming from a place that isn't logical, and then the halfway point when sort of the not guilty votes start winning and they start poking through the store, like the contradictions of the evidence, like thunderstorm breaks, and it's like literally as the room gets cooler and people stop sweating, like it's cooler heads prevailing, they focus more on logic, there's more order to the discussion, and as true justice really happens. And I thought it was also cool, like as heat rises at the beginning of the film, like it's like the cold logic and sort of like rationality and arguments like drizzling down on the windows. And I thought it was a really cool visual display of the shift in tone as the film goes, as the sort of good guys start winning, and I thought that was really, really excellent.
I could see that, yeah, and I mean for me, I think
Oh, and
especially.
one more thing. You can
Oh,
you
sure.
can see this too with sweat. When the
Mm,
characters switch sides, they stop sweating as much and they become kind of more buttoned down. And like it's most evident kind of when Cherna Brady, who's kind of the main character, is interviewing people and they sweat and sweat, and then when they say not guilty, all the tension's released in their bodies. And at the end of the film, when juror number 3 is the last one fighting back, he is covered in sweat, and all the other characters are like kind of relatively clean and calm. And
mm.
I thought that was like a super cool visual symbolism of kind of you immediately knowing just watching the film where everyone stands. Um,
Yeah, I think it's one of those things that, especially in a bottle film, to have environmental storytelling is super, and not like super crucial, right? Because like we're talking about a thing that has one setting, but to use weather as your indicator, as a breaking point in the film, I think is a clever way to use that single setting, but make it so that it's dynamic in a way. Um,
mm,
Another
I agree.
thing we talked about too was camera work wise, right? Um, So I have a disagreement with you. Uh, Fowler, you say that camera work is a strength of this film. I disagree and say it's one of its weaknesses. But why do you suspect that it's a strength for it?
Well, give your argument about weakness first, and then I'll give my strength.
Sure. For me personally, I think camera work in this film, from the two sorry, uh, from these two filmographies that I've seen from this director, Sidney Lumet, um, I feel like the camera work isn't the main thing I've been focused on. I mean, I saw it more dynamically striking with Network, with that big remember the big shot in the meeting room where it's
Yeah,
like this imposing. Yeah, that was interesting. But I feel like with this
you
one,
are meddling with fate.
yeah,
What's his
yeah,
name?
that
Yeah.
whole monologue, that whole fucking ridiculous thing. But um, but no, for this one, there's not those moments. Like there are some striking shots, like with Juror 9, where like focus is in on his face when he's like, "I actually voted not guilty," you know. Um,
Yeah, when he I told you he like mad mogs the camera. It's one of
oh
the
yeah,
funniest parts.
yeah, no. When he just like fucking eyeballs the camera, um, that's the only like dynamic real shot I can think of. Because like for the most part, it's really contained. It's not using camera work to tell stories. It's more so allowing the dialogue and the plot to do that, right? Because when
The
I
camera work is definitely much more subtle, but I think there's a lot of very unique things that he does camera work wise in this
yeah,
film that are just not normal in most bottle ship or bottle
well,
films. Where I would agree the camera work is quite sparse.
yeah.
I think it's a more subtle thing, but it's a very multi-dimensional type of camera work.
For me, like though, when we talk about dynamic camera work, I think dynamic camera work strikes me as something that moves the plot forward, right? Helps to elicit like things by using the camera as a outside observer's eye, right? And for this film, I don't think that was ever really present, right? I think it's more so like I said, the plot, the writing, the pacing, the use of weather. Those are more indicators of like moving the plot forward than I would say camera work is, and that's my definition of at least dynamic camera work, and why I view it as like kind of the weaker piece of this otherwise fantastic film.
So examples of good camera work that are subtle. I don't think the point of the camera work in this film is to be dynamic, but I think it's a very useful way of sort of controlling emotionality and tone. It's like the weather. It's layers that point out things visually. So like little things the camera work does. Um, if you watch as the film progresses, the camera shots are wider at the beginning and they slowly enclose, which is normal in like these kinds of tense bottle films. But I think in showing the claustrophobia of the decision, something that's unique to this film, I think though, is the eye level changes. At the beginning of the film, the eye level is actually looking sort of above eye level, and then kind of in the midpoint it's actually straight up eye level, and then by the end of the film the eye level is actually slightly below the faces, so you're looking up and seeing the ceiling. And I thought that
Mm,
was really cool, where like they start like the heat at top, and they're kind of looking over the characters' heads because they're dehumanizing the boy and each other, and then the camera work lowers over time as they actually see the truth of themselves and the boy more and more, and it literally has the effect of you not only seeing the walls close in, which is more conventional, but the ceilings themselves close in. And I
yeah,
think the other thing that I thought was really cool was how different characters, when they go through their unique monologues, the camera work is unique for all of the main jurors. Like Nine is the one who's perceptive and he's the one who's least biased. And all of his camera works is super close shots where it just shows his head and his unblinking eyes. And then like he's almost frog like because of the way it's sort of position of his head kind of right in the middle. And then with juror number three, who's like very emotional and very erratic, and you learn later in the story, wants to kill the boy, not because he thinks the boy's really guilty, but because it's a way of punishing the boy, like his son, in a surrogate manner.
mm,
He's almost constantly pacing and thrashing and moving back and forth, and the camera work follows him around like a Sorkin performance. And you can
yeah.
feel that dynamism as his character, but also instability increasingly.
Yeah.
And then with 4, who's like the juror number 4, who's like the stockbroker and like the cool, collected, facts oriented one, like he's always at the table basically. It's not as close a shot as juror number 9, but like he's almost like it's always waist high and over, and he's always centered solidly in, in the frame, like where he takes up half the side. And there's like little details like that with a lot of the characters. 7, the main character, his camera work is a little bit more varied, but like a lot of the characters are like that.
Or you mean
7 and
8? 8 being
oh
the
yeah,
main.
8.
Yeah.
And 7, yeah. What I meant by 7 is like he's the one that doesn't give a shit and like isn't interested in the outcome. And almost all of 7 shots where he's talking or doing anything, he's in the background. Like the camera's fixed on him, but there are characters in the prominent sort of side in front of him. And I think that captures him really well too. Is like he's just not really the center stage because he doesn't care about what's happening on like in the performance almost. And like I think it's these little things that really come together. Like the point of like Lumet's camera work is not that you're really caught by the camera work. He's not like a Tarantino guy, but like the weather, the camera work, it layers on top of each other to really strikingly, I think, and simply like capture not just the performances like most bottle films, but like visually show you like immediately like the personalities of the characters he's fixating on, or like through the weather and like eye level, like exactly where you are in the film. You know what I mean? If you rewatch the if you rewatch 12 Angry Men, knowing about his camera work or the weather, you can actually tell based on those two things only, if you had facial blindness to the characters, like who the characters are and what part of the story you are. And I can't think of another bottle film that does that. And
Maybe.
especially a bottle film this old, you know what I
Yeah.
mean? Where this
Maybe.
was super innovative.
Yeah. Maybe it's just me. I didn't pick up on that through the first viewing. Maybe in the second viewing, if I like look at it again, I'll be able to more discern that more easily. It's just for
I think
me.
that's Lumet's style, though, is that
Yeah.
he's a master of subtlety. Like he's not a guy who wants you to know his techniques like overtly, right? Like they're layered on top of each other. Like a good Lumet piece of art, you don't actually realize all the little things that he's doing because that's the point of his art. You know what I mean? I don't think that's a weakness. I think that's a very deliberate stylistic thing that he does, and I think it really complements this film in particular. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I could see that.
Yeah.
Actually, the last thing, since we talked about characters a little bit.
Have I won you over?
Yeah. Well, listen, I am not like Juror 3, you know. My opinion can be flexible in a way. Uh,
So have you shifted your position
I,
as not juror number 3?
okay, listen, come on now. You don't need to press me this hard like you're Juror 8 over here, all right?
I'm just asking questions. I just want to
All
know what
right,
your
yeah,
position
yeah.
is.
I will say I will give it a second view and then let you know. How about that?
Okay, fair enough. I
Fair
consider that a not guilty verdict,
enough.
and I consider that a win.
uh, then we talked about characters a little bit. Actually, character development was something you put on there, and I put on as well. Um, so I think like I'll talk about it a little bit with what I was thinking. Um,
Okay.
all of these characters have a moment to shine, right? Like I feel like it's one of the few films with like a big ensemble where I feel like all the characters were given space to like not only showcase who their character is, but also be able to like have those moments. Like I feel like none of those characters, beyond maybe Juror One, because I don't. Juror One was like getting some of the plot heavy stuff out, like just kind of moving the conversation forward. But he never had that moment where we could develop his character or where his character was like showcased. If that makes
Although
sense.
I think that's kind of part of the story. Like juror number 1 is
Yeah,
the leader. It's a democratic system, so his leadership almost doesn't matter once the story begins. You know what I mean?
yeah. But it's
Yeah.
also like his character is the only one I feel like we don't have like a solid grasp about like backstory, like sort of things that we can surmise from the other characters.
That's true. I would agree with that.
Um, but yeah,
Moment
what
to
about
shine or moment to darken, because some of these characters are pretty reprehensible.
yeah,
But yeah, I agree. I think like the character development's definitely true in terms of the writing. Like, we were talking while watching this, like, you can actually tell the occupations and personalities of the characters based on their arguments. Where Four is a stockbroker and a detailed data guy, and his arguments are all about like the time of day or like the specific physical pieces of evidence. Juror number 7 is an architect, and Brian was talking about how
Juror
he's
number
the one
8.
that realizes.
Juror number 8 is the
Or
architect. Juror number 7 is the one
juror
who's
number
obsessed with
juror number 8
baseball.
is the architect, and he's the one that figures out spatially that the witness, the old man, couldn't have actually seen what he saw. Juror number 7, who's the salesman, like he almost always tries to deflect using jokes and innuendos and like all these sort of like salesman tactics basically to avoid the discussion. Juror number 9 is like the old man who's an expert on human behavior. He almost entirely ignores all the physical evidence and he focuses on motivations and like the way people are dressed and like little observations like that. And but I don't even think it's just the dialogue. Like, you can tell kind of the you can tell like the neighborhood and whether or not they're natives or immigrants and like basically their occupations
Also, social
of the
class.
characters based on and social class based on the characters' clothing, on their accents, on the lingo they use. Like, it's a really well made film where you can really, like, if you've rewatching the film the second time as I did, I think this was Brian's first time. Like, you actually kind of can already tell if you're observant enough who the characters really are from the beginning of the film, which is I think a really cool effect. You know what I mean?
Mm.
Um, like all the evidence for who they are is already laid out for you if you're able to deduce it from the very beginning.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And I think that's definitely, I would tend to agree that that is one of the biggest strengths of this film is the characters being able to really encapsulate that bottle film space and like really have each character be their own unique sort of person within this discussion, right?
yeah, totally agreed.
So
So you thought camera work was a weakness before I persuaded you, like juror number 8, into changing your
I
mind. But would you say there are any other weaknesses?
I wouldn't say there were. And also, persuaded is a bit aggressive on your part. I would say you convinced me to take another stab at watching it again. Is what
Bedazzled, hypnotized.
all words that I wouldn't agree to personally. But to get back to what we were talking about with character development, um, we'll actually. Do you want to go into each juror so we have like a background of like who they are, so we can talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, we can do them, and we'll do them relatively quickly.
Hmm.
So I'll just give my notes, and then you can say if there's anything to add.
Sure.
So juror number 1 is the leader. He's a high school coach,
Mm,
baseball coach, and he's relatively objective. He doesn't have a lot of biases, and but he's very weak-willed and he's easily discouraged. He when he's criticized at the beginning of the film, he tries to give his position of leadership to someone else. He will set up sort of arrangements or procedures, and then he'll allow other more strong personalities, like juror number 3 in particular, to overrule him. So I think like he's very deliberately written as a weaker character, and I think part of that is sort of the theme of democracy in the film. I think part of it is also like if he was a super in control character, the plot wouldn't really happen. Like three and 8 couldn't railroad him in the same way. You know what I mean?
yeah, I totally agree. Like that's kind of what his character is to a T.
Yeah. Juror number 2, not as important a character. He's kind of this young guy. He's a first time juror, and he's kind of overeager. He's very meek. He's not very bright, and he's very shy. And he's the most easily persuaded character out of the jurors. He's often changes his vote not based on the facts, but actually based on like how persuasive or aggressive other jurors are. He's the only juror at the beginning of the film who basically admits that his guilty verdict is vibes based and not based on the evidence.
Yeah.
Yeah, Juror number 3 is sort of like the villain of the story, really. He's this self-made small businessman. He's very hot-tempered. He's extremely aggressive. He doesn't really care about procedure or rules. He believes in harsh punishments. He's deeply undemocratic. He's willing to sort of bully people into achieving, getting what he wants.
Deeply
He
toxically
rejects,
masculine as well.
yeah, deeply toxically masculine, rejects evidence. He's completely controlled by his emotions, and he's biased against the boy because because he beat his son, basically like ran away and has not communicated with him in 2 years. So putting the boy in the chair is almost a weird symbolic way of like
Punishing
hurting his
his
son.
son. Yeah.
Yeah. I
Yeah,
don't know if you had anything else to say. He's one of the more important characters among the jurors.
yeah, he has a lot of moments in it, where he's the last one to actually vote not guilty, and
Yeah.
it's in this dramatic scene where it is revealed that it's like a pseudo punishment for his son.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah,
Juror number 4 is a stockbroker. He's calm, analytical, completely oriented about facts, very precise. He's disinterested in really interacting with or developing relationships with any of the other jurors. He's very good at perceiving discrepancies in other people's arguments or in the evidence. And he's a very skilled debater. I would say that of the pro death penalty characters, he's the most effective. And he's got a good memory. He's very technically competent, but he's also a character who really is facts based. A lot of the people who want the boy to die are driven by some sort of prejudice, and he's really, I think, the only one that like is very much willing without being pressured into switching his position to not guilty, actually based on the fact that he changes his mind honestly and interacts honestly with the group.
yeah, he is by far one of the more persuasive ones on the guilty side of it. And he's one of the longer holdouts as well.
I think he's second to last, right?
Um, third technically because I think Juror 10 gives up second to last.
Oh, sure. We'll get to juror number 10, who's one of the worst.
Yeah.
Juror number 5 is very shy and insecure. He grew up in the slums. He's kind of terrified of other people being able to notice that he came from the slums because he's self conscious. He has sympathies for the boy because they have similar backgrounds. The boy came from a ghetto too. But he's not courageous enough initially to vote not guilty. He only does it when other people vote not guilty first. And he's sort of, I think, an example of a character who knows there's injustice, but he's afraid because of his own social position to really speak his mind and be persecuted for it.
Yeah, I'd agree.
Juror number 6, he's kind of this working class tough guy. He's very principled. He stands up to bullies. He's the only person who can shut down the worst jurors. Like juror number 3 is disrespecting juror number 9, who's a member of the elderly, and he's like, "I'll weigh you out if you disrespect your elders." Juror number 7, who keeps pushing away from the jury. Everyone keeps telling him to shut up throughout this thing and take it seriously. He ignores them. Kind of near the third part of the film, juror number 6 says really shortly to him, just like, keep your fucking mouth shut, and he does. He's like a not very bright guy, but he's like, he's like got a natural presence. He's definitely a leader, and he's someone who like, sticks by his guns. And I think there's little details about him that I like that show that he's the only one who can actually take the fan apart and realizes that they can't fix it. And he's he's kind of an interesting character. He's my favorite like background juror, I think.
Yeah, he's it's interesting to watch his interplay too, because I would have figured Because it's kind of implied that he's Italian, right?
He's a working class white of some kind. I don't think he's Northern European. He's like Italian or he's
Yeah.
yeah
So
Greek maybe.
yeah,
Yeah.
but definitely like of the working class ilk of that era. So it's like I think at one point there's a kind of interplay with that and the sympathy for the plaintiff.
Yeah. Juror number 7. So Brian and I have a disagreement. Brian hates juror number 12 the most. I think juror number 7 is actually the worst character morally in the story.
Which is
Juror number
crazy
7,
because juror number 10 is an active racist.
yeah, in my mind it goes 7 is the worst, then 10, then 12. And Brian, I think it's the opposite. It's 12, then 10, then 7.
Yeah, 12 just fucking 12. Jesus. Continue though.
So juror number 7 is he's a salesman. And I think the thing that makes him so evil is that he's the one juror who doesn't care whether the boy is innocent or guilty. All he cares about is making it to his baseball game. And juror number 7, you know, he's tacky and he's ugly and he is a wisecracker and he spends the entire time attempting to like finish the case as quickly as possible. He doesn't even bother defending his position, and he actually switches to not guilty. He's the only character to switch to not guilty, not because he gets convinced by juror number 8 and 9, but just because it's convenient if everyone says not guilty so he can leave quicker. And I think there's such a sociopathy to you putting a kid in the chair who you think is innocent, or letting a person who fucking brutally murdered their father to death go based on your own selfishness. And I think he's like easily the most evil character in the story.
Yeah, I mean, you know, obviously, in all actuality, I think he is the worst person in this story. Juror 12, big piece of shit. Do not like him, but that's more so for him being and we'll get into it, braggadocious asshole.
That's true. Juror number 8 is the first one to say not guilty. He's an architect, um, and he's really the most moral character. He demands that they give the boy a real chance by really going over the evidence, no matter how strong the evidence is. They don't kill someone through their own carelessness. He lectures the others when they don't take it seriously. And juror number 8 is actually not the one, I think, who one of the ones who's best at like figuring out who's truthful and who's not. He's the best at like convincing the others. He's very emotionally intelligent and extremely persuasive. And I think later it's actually juror number 9 who really actually pieces together the truth of things. In particular, juror number 8 is just sort of the person who makes the best argument in defense of the boy, I think.
Mm.
And he's the leader of the not guilty group.
Yeah, he is probably in my eyes like because I remember we pointed it out too. He would probably be the best one to make that spatial argument about the old man who tried to say that he saw the kid running down the stairs, right? Being an architect.
Yeah.
So that was just something that was interesting that I pointed out to Fowler while we watched.
Yeah, no, that was a really good observation. I never thought of that. Juror number 9 is this old man. He's my favorite character because he's a baller. He's very, very good. He's extremely observant. He notices little things about people's makeup and their personality and their behaviors. He's the one that susses out like sussy motivations, not only in the jurors but also the witnesses. He's exceedingly intelligent and thoughtful. Um, but the thing that I like about juror number 9 is that he's this tiny old man, but he's constantly mad dogging other characters. Like no character ruins another character's argument like juror number 9. He'll like point out something that fucking murders their argument, and then he'll just stare with these big owl eyes into the camera at them, usually looking up at them, and then they're just like fucking furious that he's fucked them up, and then they can't do shit because juror number 6 will kick the shit out of you if you fucking disrespect him. So he's just like this tiny, skinny little bird man like swaggering his way across the room, like mad dogging people and fucking up their arguments.
Oh yeah, it's an excellent dichotomy, especially with the more aggressive members of the juror. Just this old man like fucking being like, "I see you and I know who you are." It's great.
Yeah. Juror number 10 is just openly a racist. He's like this loud, ignorant, stupid racist, and he doesn't care about democracy. He doesn't really. He thinks the boy is guilty not because of the evidence, but because of his race.
Mm,
And he's one of. I would say he's the most aggressive character at the beginning, until 3 kind of loses his goddamn mind. And he is so racist that he's actually exiled from the group. Like they
yeah,
just all are enough of
they
his shit, and even the guilty people are like, "Fuck off! We don't
yeah
want you associating with us."
they literally put him at the kids' table, in the room. Like
Yeah, there's a little table away from the jurors, and they force him to sit there with his back to the rest of them
yeah,
in order to continue talking.
it's insane that that man was let to be put on trial, right, or to be one of the jurors, right? Like
Yeah, 1950s, 1960s America. Also, no women there. It was a crazy time to be alive.
yeah,
Uh, Juror number 11 is the only immigrant juror. He's a clockmaker, and he's probably the most educated, I would say, and the most like academically smart.
or
And his
more
role,
so watches. Sorry,
or yeah, watches.
yeah,
And he has a fascination with America, with democracy, with procedure and values. And he's the one that has sort of this reverence for the justice system and sort of demands from the others that they take it seriously in the way that they must as Americans. And juror number 11 is sort of the one that shames the others. He like points out to 7 and 10 that they're monsters and that they don't deserve the country they live in, you know.
yeah,
And he's in many ways the most principled character in the story.
yeah. I would agree. It takes a long time for him to come around, though. I think.
Yes, and he really does take it most seriously. Like all the rest are just like going off memory, and then you learn about halfway through the story that he has a notepad where he's written down all the evidence at the times and stuff like that.
Yeah,
Yeah. Um, Last and in Brian's mind least is juror number 12. Brian, would you like to describe juror number 12? I'm going to defend
sure.
juror number
I
12.
I want to point out to the audience members listening that in my notes specifically, I want to reference my notes for this one. In specific, I put super wealthy man and then in parentheses absolute piece of shit. This man, uh, he works at a big advertising firm in Manhattan, and he will certainly let you know it because this man said,
Wait, really quickly, before you keep going, Brian, did
okay,
did you mention that he's a big shot advertising executive in Manhattan?
fuck you. Okay. It's been a
He
running joke.
mentions this like
It's a
8 times throughout the
Yeah,
story.
it's been a running joke that Fowler throughout the episode just fucking go like we pause it, we talk about it, obviously do that thing. Fowler like does this thing where he's like, "Oh, did you know that this character is an avatar?" Because the dude just keeps fucking mentioning it, and at a certain point, Juror 1 and like 11 are right next to him, and I could see in Juror 11's eyes like, I don't fucking give a shit. And truly, me personally, I don't give a shit either. Like, and this flip floppy motherfucker, like, if he's like a house of cards, right? He'll fucking crumble to the ground as soon as anyone fucking lays out any evidence to him. He is
Every
absolutely
every other juror switches their position at most once. He switches his position 3 times
yes,
throughout this story.
he's the fucking worst. I feel like I have a lot to say about him, but Fowler, what do you have to say about this enormous piece of shit?
He's obviously the wealthiest of the characters. Like he's
Mm,
extremely well dressed. He has the cigarette holder. He's obviously well educated. He's also the dumbest character. Like juror
yeah,
number 12, I don't think he's even evil in the same way 7 and 10 are. He's just like very stupid. Like anytime anyone says anything, even if it contradicts the thing that juror 12 said before, he'll agree with them. And like during the discussion, he's like literally caught doodling and playing tic tac toe, and he just doesn't really care. Like the classism and the racisms and like these things, like he just doesn't. It doesn't matter to him, and he's so self-obsessed that it's I don't even think that he's mean. He's actually quite generous with the immigrant character, juror number 11, and sort of the character who came from the hood, juror number 5. Like, it's just this weird glazed apathy where he just kind of walks through the world not understanding it well enough to have an opinion about it. And, oh, I forgot to mention, he is a Manhattan based advertising executive
I
who was
swear to
very
God.
successful.
I swear to God. We Fowler and I had a conversation where I was like, if you keep mentioning this throughout the episode, I'm gonna fucking throw my laptop. Cause Jesus Christ. Uh, but anyway, that is my strong opinion about fucking Juror 12. Um, you know, everyone's entitled to their own opinion on that though. But
He's a
we
good man. Good man. Will be
very
missed.
much not. But that's okay. He can burn in hell for all I care. So on that cheery note, we have a couple questions. As
Hmm.
always, we try and hit a couple discussion questions here. Um, this
But
is
you're going to cover our themes. We're making it a new thing where the questions are our themes.
yeah. So just to kind of like tie up those two things, because we feel as though they're kind of more so interconnected than
Hmm.
we previously thought. So, first and foremost, I'm going to go with the first one I have here, which is given that we've done two bottle episodes now back to back, those being Hateful Eight and now here with 12 Angry Men. I just wanted to see what you think separates those two films in terms of like successes. Like, what makes The Hateful Eight a successful bottle film and or not as successful bottle film in comparison to like 12 Angry Men.
Well, I'm interested in your response, but off the top of my head, I might have more. Is I think with LeMay, it's like the subtlety component and his ability to be much more malleable.
Yeah,
Like with Hateful Eight, there's clear zones of emotionality and pacing, and 12 Angry Men's not like that. Like he very seamlessly shifts between very different emotions, and it's harder to break the film into blocks because of it. And like it's not just like with the Hateful Eight where you have a character reveal and then they either die or like they become a supporting role. Like there are multiple reveals of different characters within 12 Angry Men, and I would say the other thing about it is like I just don't think the Hateful Eight has pacing problems, and 12
mm,
Angry Men doesn't. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah,
and there are points like during the Hateful Eight, and to be clear, Brian and I both really like the Hateful Eight, but
yeah,
there are points in the Hateful Eight where we were like, this could be shortened or like this could be removed,
yeah,
and like sitting here thinking, I can't think of a single part of this film that really could be removed without damaging the film. You know what I mean?
yeah. Actually, funny enough, the way we were watching it, the film was cut by like 10 minutes. Like there was a 10-minute section that was cut, and that section was super important to setting up like the next scene.
Yeah.
And so we had to actually go and try and like find the scene in order to piece it together. But to speak on it from my perspective with The Hateful Eight, obviously two different films, right? One's Western, one's like a courtroom drama, right?
Yeah.
Um, but beyond that, I think I tend to agree with a lot of your assertions or assertions about pacing. Pacing was the biggest issue in terms of the difference between these two. Um, but I
And
will.
also, I think I would also say really quickly is
Sure.
also Tarantino is not as good at blending emotions as Lumet is. Like
Mm,
there are parts we were talking about this of like shocking violence and darkness and depravity in Tarantino, and then really funny parts. And I think the only character that does both well competently at the same time is John Roof, played by Kurt Russell, where he's
mm,
very easily able to switch between being the most terrifying character in the story to being one of the funnier ones. But I feel like they were not like Tarantino was not able to do both simultaneously very well. I
Yeah.
don't think that's the case with 12 Angry Men, where you shift from like the horror of what like juror number 7 and 10 represent to like funny scenes. And like we're talking about like juror number 9 being really funny because he's like mad dogging the characters that worse.
Mm,
Or like 11 having these impassioned speeches about democracy after the worst characters speak. And like he was able to really skillfully switch between like the darkest characters and their tendencies to like actually very funny laugh out loud sequences,
yeah.
or like really heartfelt poignant sequences. And like Tarantino, I don't think ever in his career had that kind of mastery of emotion in his writing.
I think that's the difference between the two writing styles too, right? Like,
Mm,
both, a lot of people talk about Tarantino's work and they say it's naturalistic. Yes and no. Like, it's naturalistic in some senses, like, with your, I don't know, like Reservoir Dogs, where they talk about the concept of tipping, like in that scene.
yeah.
There's like some natural elements to that, but it's also elevated, right? Whereas
Mm.
in at least from what we see with 12 Angry Men, um, naturalism in this sense is people talking over one another, people appealing to one another's, emotional sort of biases and whatnot. Um, I think it's a more accurate representation of what an actual dialogue would look like.
That's an interesting idea. Almost like Tarantino's dialogue from a topic and pacing perspective is more naturalistic, but like there are other components of naturalism that he doesn't do that Lumet understands and can do competently on top of it
Yeah,
almost.
exactly. It's like this concept of like uh, there's differences in terms of like naturalism, and I think
Mm.
that's like what Lumet understands, and I don't think Tarantino fully gets. Um,
Mm.
but another thing I had was so in your mind, why is it important that we don't hear any of the trial, but just the discussion with the jurors afterwards?
Because I think it's really a film about how hard it is to know the truth of anything,
Hmm.
and the characters can't see the truth or the evidence accurately or truthfully because of their own biases, and neither can we because we can only see it through their biased lens.
Yes.
If we were able to see the evidence ourselves, then we would see where they're biased, but we can't do that. And especially at the beginning of the film, when we don't know how they're biased, we don't understand that what we're listening to is actually not the truth, you know? We
Hmm.
take it at face value, and it's only later in the film that we realize the foolishness of that, which I think is really the point of the story in many ways.
And I think it's important to understand that like I think because when you start, because essentially what this story is starting a story in the middle, right? It's not starting it at the beginning or the end. This is the
Yeah.
this is the meat of the story. Um, and I think it's important when you do that, um, to, especially as a writer, establish things within that can be implicit rather than explicit explanations, and that's how you
What do
get.
you mean by that?
So, in my eyes, what I mean by that is like, um, in terms of like deliberately putting the trial in the middle, it gives you this sense of like, as a writer, you need to establish the characters and you need to establish like the main meat and potatoes of your plot through character development without having these setups to it, right?
Hmm.
There's no flashbacks, there's no story devices that allow you to get ascertain any information outside of this courtroom. It's just purely
Hmm.
these men talking, right? Um, so I think that's what really like showcases like Lumet's abilities as a writer. Um, just absolutely being able to take something from not the starting piece of it or the ending piece of it, but taking that middle and being able to draw it out in a way that is um, digestible to the audience and able to be consumed in a way that allows us to understand how the story is going without like the explicit detail of like the beginning and the end, right? Does that make
Yeah,
sense in a way?
that's a really interesting point. Yeah, I would agree with that
Yeah.
actually as well.
Um, so that's something I thought about with that. And then this actually leads nicely into my last question, which is, what do you think this movie is telling us about bias?
I think a lot of the movie about bias is like we said, like the difficulty of understanding the truth,
Hmm.
and I think you can see that with a lot of the characters. Like Ten's guilty stance is almost it's all his racism,
Hmm.
and with three, it's all about like his problems with his son causing him to hate the young,
Yeah,
basically.
sure.
And even with four, like four starts listing statistics at the beginning part of the film about like it being like homicides and violent crimes being tied to like certain neighborhoods, and that's classism on four's part.
Yeah.
And even the not guilty characters are themselves motivated initially, at least, by their own biases. Eight doesn't initially argue based on who's the main character of the story. Doesn't initially argue on the facts. He argues that the boy comes from a hard environment and poverty, and that his father beat him. That he's empathetic of him, which is also why five also backs the boy is his own background from the ghetto. Six, the working class blue collar guy, he is most susceptible to listening to the not guilty verdict because nine is an old man and he respects his elders. So I
Mm.
think it's like really, and you see those biases against each other where characters attempt to win over other characters, but they have biases or prejudices that they accidentally reveal that make those characters not like them or not willing to work with them. And you know, and then you have all the characters like two and seven, who it's based on convenience or persuasion strategies rather than the facts that cause them to change their votes. And all of their biases cause them to dehumanize the boy from being a person to being whatever they view him as,
Yeah.
and being unable to see the truth of reality. And I think that shows like how dangerous bias is, not just in terms of like the justice system, but just in terms of living your life honestly and seeing the world clearly.
And I think in a weird way, even if bias is used as like a positive, like in the case of Juror 8, right? It
Yeah.
still shows the danger of it. Like how easily it is to, because the story starts with one person uh, thinking that not guilty verdict is right because they have reasonable doubts, right? And then
Yeah.
they are able to, using emotional, like sort of uh, if you want to call it manipulation, you can, but I would call it like emotional persuasion, um,
Yeah.
in order to convey his point, and eventually using sort of fallacies in the logic of other members, um, in order to get the not guilty verdict. And
Mhm.
you can you can see that even if a bias is used for like good intentions, it's super dangerous because it can lead
Yeah,
to,
because what if the kid actually did kill his father? You know what
yeah,
I mean? We didn't know at that point in the story, and so like, what if you let a murderer onto the streets who murdered their own father because you feel bad for them because you have a bias for them? You know what I mean?
yes,
That could be really dangerous, I think.
yeah. And I think it's a very interesting point to bring up because it showcases like the danger on both sides of the spectrum, right?
Yeah, bias of any form is bad, even if it gives you the right conclusion. If you're doing it because of a bias that is negative, I think that in itself is a problem that really needs to be perceived very carefully.
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely. um Fowler, you also had a couple questions as well, correct?
yeah, so I think an interesting one is how much discomfort the characters had with the uncertainty, and how many of them were willing to resort to prejudices or stereotypes or bending the truth to avoid uncertainty about the murders, about themselves, and who they were as people. And I'm kind of curious what your thoughts are about that. Because that's, I think, the strongest thing besides the prejudice and biases we were talking about,
Yeah.
that stops them from reaching the right conclusion in a sense is that they're uncomfortable with not knowing, you know?
Yeah, and I think in any trial setting or any of that sort of thing, I think the thing is you always have to think about like the what ifs, right? Um, Here's an example from my own life, at least, is I have specifically aunts and uncles who do law practice, and some of them are prosecutors and some of them are defendants. Some of them have
Mm,
had clients on different ends of the spectrum where they know whether or not like they've done it, whether or not they're guilty, right?
mm,
Um, but their whole perspective is that if the law is like if you are to uphold the law and go through these trials, right, then you have to follow to the letter of the law. And you have to defend people to the best of your ability, even if they, are guilty in this sense, right? And you hope
mm,
that the prosecutor uh, has the ability to argue their case in an effective manner. Um, and it's a very interesting balance. So, in terms of the question here, though, I think it's important to understand that, like, these sort of things in general, like the uncertainty of not knowing, those aren't in the hands of like people like us. Lawyers will probably know better than because they actually work with the clients directly, right?
mm.
Uh, so, but I think in terms of ourselves, uh, and especially in this film, it's coming to grips with that uncertainty, right? Like coming to grips with the fact that like we don't know. But if there's evidence that points to it being a thing that becomes less and less sure, then is that really worth putting an innocent man to death?
Mm.
And in this case, the argument is no, that is not worth it. Um, so, from my perspective, that's how I see it. Uncertainty plays such a heavy part in this, along with bias. But I think that it's important to understand that, like, uncertainty is a driving factor in a lot of like decisions we make, regardless of like this film or in general. So
Yeah, I would agree. And I think that's a really powerful part of juror number eight in general is like he's the one arguing the not guilty verdict. He's their leader. But whenever they ask juror like, "Are you sure about this? Are you sure about that?" He always says like, "I don't know, but there are questions, or I don't know, but there's a reasonable doubt."
yeah,
And I think the problem with certainty in general is it makes you hard and unkind and view things
hmm
in a binary sense. You
yeah,
don't have to learn anything, you don't have to interact with people, you have the truth. There's a great quote in the film. We both commented on what a powerful quote it is of like like what makes you so certain you have a monopoly on the truth, which is said to 10 by 9. And
about his
that's such a
racist
power
tendency. Yeah,
yeah, and that's such a powerful point that like the thing that makes us so certainty so desiring is the thing that makes it dangerous, which is you think you have a monopoly on the truth. You think that you're right over everyone else. And it is when they doubt, it is when they're afraid of being wrong, it's when they're uncertain that they soften and they're willing to listen to each other and they're willing to come together and they ultimately find the truth. And I think uncertainty is also important because they don't find the truth through one lens. Like it is the psychology of juror number 9 that allows them to understand the motivations and how they're biased in some case of the eyewitnesses. It is like the kind of questioning of juror number 8 initially, even if he doesn't have the answers, of some of the evidence that leads to everyone thinking about it. It is juror number 4 who's actually on the guilty side. It is his fact based approach that allows them to really tackle the key issues of the boy's sort of defense and actually break it down. And like the truth could have never been arrived at in a reasonable way through the certain truth of only one person in the jury room. They really needed half the jury basically in order to really know definitively in any sense.
Yeah, and it's a very interesting point to like look at that and how that interplays with bias as well, because
Yeah,
it's like the most crucial parts of that film.
yeah. I had only one more question, and then I think we can rate it,
Sure. Yeah.
which is the nature of the American justice system. Because I
Mm,
think like there's so many people in the jury who don't give a shit about democratic process or equality.
yeah.
Juror number 12 and 7 don't give a fuck about the proceedings. They don't care if he lives or dies.
Mm,
Jurors number 3 and 10, they openly say they don't care about democracy or equality, that they just want him to be guilty for their own biased reasons.
yeah.
Juror number 3 explicitly says he's willing to throw out all the facts on the case. And, you know, jury number 10 says he doesn't care about the law and the law allows all these like whatever his racist tendencies tied to. It's left
Yeah.
ambiguous, I think, very powerfully what race the defendant is. That he doesn't care about the law if it helps those defendants get off that are of that race. And it very easily could have led to that boy's death. So I guess the question is like, would you say this film is pro-American justice and like believes it actually is a way of solving the truth, or would you say it has a much darker view of that? And in your opinion about American justice in particular through this film?
So, do you want my opinion about the American justice system, or my opinion about like just how it's
In the
portrayed in
film
the film?
specifically, I don't think we have time to tackle the
Yeah,
American justice.
I know. This would be like a 2 hour long, maybe 3 hour long episode. um, so I would say that it showcases that the American justice system can work as long as there are people who can work within it, right? Um,
Hmm.
I think it showcases that most people inherently have biases, don't really give a shit about like justice or truth. They give a shit about frontier justice, like we were talking about last episode, right? The here and now, this is that, bing bang boom, right? Um, but for me, it showcases that, with Juror 8, that there can be people who will be able to be persuasive, be able to look at a case and be objective. And
Hmm.
Juror 8, although we've already established that he has his own personal biases, he has his own like personal motivations, his own ways of persuading people that could be viewed as manipulative, but I think inherently it's showcasing that in order for the justice system to work, people have to give a shit, and people have to convince other people to give a shit. Um, and that's very
Which is,
difficult.
I think, what makes juror number 7 so evil is
Yeah,
he really doesn't actually care
yeah,
about the life of the child at all.
yeah, and
Yeah.
it's one of those things that um, I think it's a very interesting point because you could easily see it as the dark uh, path of apathy, right? Like just not
Hmm.
giving a shit about the system at all. Uh,
Hmm.
for me personally, I view it as pro justice system in this specific case because it's showcasing that like even though you have a room full of people with biases, people who are complicit to those other biases, you can still have people there who can fight for the system.
That's really interesting. Yeah, I would think you've moved me over about it being more positive because I was leaning more on the negative. But I
Mm-hmm.
think, they really show like even if you have one juror number 8, that in itself can be enough to move a largely prejudiced, apathetic jury around him into making the right decision. So I do think ultimately, I think the movie lands positively, which I
Yeah,
think,
and
yeah,
personally, I don't think it's accurate to how it would actually go down. I think realistically, like they would just kind of vote him guilty, like, and it'd be essentially like a 5 minute film. Because like
yeah,
I don't think there are many juror eights out there, right? I don't think there are many people who would speak up and be principled enough to advocate for their position.
yeah, I would agree. Sadly,
Yeah, but yeah, that's a rather sad note to end it on.
What would you rate the film?
Uh, it's 10 out of 10 for me. It's not
Mm.
like my 10 out of 10. Actually, okay, here, because we've had, what now, 3 10 out of 10s?
Yeah, Eternal Sunshine, Shape of Water, and this. And I would also, yeah.
You would also put Network as well, I think, right?
I would have Network lower because I'm rating them on technical ability. I think this is a much technically better film, although I
Okay,
like Network more.
so in terms of the 3 10 out of 10s, personally,
Yeah.
I'd put uh, Eternal Sunshine at the top, then Shape of Water, then Network.
You mean and then 12 Angry Men?
Or, I'm sorry, and then 12 Angry Men. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
That's interesting. I think I would agree that out of the 10 out of 10s, this is my least. But I think it goes with the statement that this is a much older film
Mhm.
with a lot less to work with, you know?
Yeah,
I think
I'd agree.
this is not necessarily the most like provocative or like grandiose 10 out of 10 film, but for what it is as a fucking debut too in this time period and what he's working with, it's an amazingly
Yeah,
perfect film,
it's
like
probably
unbelievable on technical level.
it's probably the best debut film I've ever seen of a director. Like,
Hmm.
it's crazy that this was like the first film he was given the opportunity to direct.
Yeah.
Uh, but yeah, that's about it. Any final thoughts before we head out?
Yeah, I think there's one important thing we forgot to say, so I just want to say it right before we leave.
If you start about
Um,
Juror 12, I
did you know
will.
that juror number
I
12 is
swear to
an
God, I
marketing
knew
executive?
as soon as you were starting that shit up. I knew it. As soon as you were fucking doing it, you were teeing it up. Fuck you. All right. Thank you guys for watching. Subscribe for some more film podcast oriented shit, and we will talk to you soon. All right. Bye.